Our top focus at this hour. The Israeli military has claimed that its air defenses intercepted 2 projectiles that crossed from Lebanon into northern Israel.
And this hours after US President Donald Trump said Israel and Hezbollah have agreed to stop fighting and added that Iran talks were moving rapidly after seeming to falter over Israel's Lebanon offensive.
Well, Trump said that he had spoken to Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu and had a very good call through unnamed representatives with Hezbollah as well. No US president has ever spoken with Hezbollah with or without intermediaries, and the group is designated as a terrorist organization by the United States. In a post on his Truth Social network, Trump claimed the Iran-backed group agreed all shooting will stop, while Netanyahu agreed to call off military raid on Beirut.
Now, Trump's comments came after Iran's news agency Tasnim reported that Iran had suspended dialogue with mediators in protest of Israel's expanding offensive in Lebanon against Hezbollah. The Israeli leader had ordered strikes on what he called terror targets in Beirut's southern suburbs in response to rocket and drone attacks by Hezbollah.
The visual that you see on the screens right now shows the aftermath of an Israeli strike near a hospital in Tyre. Look at this.
A report in the US news outlet Axios said that Trump called the Israeli premier crazy and accused him of putting Iran talks at risk.
Netanyahu, after Trump's announcement, said that his country would strike Beirut if Hezbollah doesn't stop attacking Israel. Trump doubled down after Netanyahu's statement, saying in a further Truth Social post that the Israeli leader had turned his troops around from a planned major raid on Beirut.
Netanyahu may also be facing international pressure and internal pressure. Israel's Minister of National Security, Itamar Ben-Gvir, called on Netanyahu to say no to Trump and continue the strikes.
All right, to discuss more on this, we're now being joined by Trita Parsi from Washington, D.C., co-founder of the Quincy Institute and Substack author. Mr. Parsi, absolute pleasure having you here with us on World DNA. I believe this is our first interaction. Let's get your views on this very quickly. April 8th, that's when the ceasefire was announced. Lebanon was very much mentioned by the mediators when the ceasefire was to come in effect, but we saw that the fighting in Lebanon never stopped, and eventually the US switched its stance that Lebanon wasn't part of that deal between US and Iran. Then the ceasefire comes into effect on the 17th of April between Israel and Hezbollah in Lebanon. Fighting still never stops. Trump even said, and this is quote-unquote saying, Israel is prohibited from carrying out those attacks on Lebanon. The fighting still doesn't stop. Now we are hearing that in spite of the fact that the ceasefire is in place, Trump's saying that both sides have agreed to stop fighting. Is there a pause in the fight, or is this an admission that the ceasefire was never in effect?
It's unclear whether Trump will succeed in pressuring Netanyahu into upholding and respecting the ceasefire. Of course, Hezbollah would have to do the same thing. But what is at the heart of this is that the Iranians insist that any end to the fighting, end to the war between the US and Iran also has to be accompanied by a regional ceasefire in which the Israelis cease their attacks on Lebanon, on Gaza, and other places. And the Iranians have insisted on this from the very beginning because they believe that if Israel is allowed to continue to bomb these countries, that instability will eventually spill over into another Israeli-Iranian war, just as it already has twice. And as a result, any deal, particularly with major Iranian concessions to the US, is not worth it if the Israelis are left free to restart the war. But it's also a way for them to test whether Trump is capable and willing to restrain the Israelis, because if he isn't, or if he can't, then the value of a ceasefire or a deal with the United States may be very limited. And this is what Trump is at this point trying to do. He's trying to pressure the Israelis to respect the ceasefire in order for him to be able to strike a deal with the Iranians. And now we see that the Israelis are doing quite a lot in order to defy Trump. And the ball is in many ways back in Trump's court. Is he going to put real and sustained pressure on Netanyahu to cease his destabilizing activities in the region in order for Trump to be able to end the war with Iran?
Mr. Parsi, now that we mention US President Donald Trump, he claims talks are moving rapidly while Israeli strikes continue in Lebanon, and Hezbollah also claims dozens of attacks. Are we mistaking negotiations as progress? Because that doesn't seem to be the case.
Yes, to a certain extent, and it's because of the fact that Trump is negotiating too publicly. He's giving too many press conferences. He constantly wants to make sure that he is the newsmaker. And as a result, while that may be working for him politically in many other contexts, it is undermining, or at a minimum, complicating the diplomacy. Because even when progress is made, it is rarely believed by the media, because there's been so many false statements of false starts to the negotiations or false progress in the negotiations. As you recall, 2 weeks ago, there was supposed to have been a deal, and that appears to have been prematurely announced by Trump.
Mr. Parsi, hours after the top negotiator from Iran's side, Bagher Ghalibaf, Iranian parliament speaker as well, he mentioned that the deal or any kind of negotiations are off unless Lebanon and the fighting in Lebanon stops. And thereafter, we see that call and those statements coming out from both Netanyahu and Trump regarding their discussion and their talks. And now the troops are turning back after going far into Lebanon, the deepest that they've gone in the last 26 years. When, let me add that this is when a ceasefire is already in place. On one end, you have Netanyahu saying we'll attack if they attack us, and talking about Hezbollah. On one end, you have Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf saying the deal is off unless the fighting in Lebanon stops. Is Trump sandwiched here between the Israelis and the Iranians?
In some ways, he is, but this is, again, a position he put himself in by agreeing to go to war with Iran on behalf, or at least at a minimum, based on a lot of pressure from Israel. By doing so, he put himself in a position in which all of his options will be ranging from bad to worse. Had he not started this war, he would not have been put in this compromised position as he is right now. But at the end of the day, Trump is the president of the United States. He has to make a decision that is based on the U.S.'s best interest. And at this point, it seems that he has fully understood that ending the war with Iran is an absolute necessity. And as a result, if that then requires him to put pressure on Netanyahu to cease bombing and annexing and ethnically cleansing southern Lebanon, then that is something I think that he needs to do, even though it will come at a cost and a price to him politically, including here in Washington. But that is simply what U.S. national interest at this point requires.
Mr. Parsi, critics of your position would say that diplomacy only works because someone else created leverage in the battlefield first. What would be your response to that?
No, that's not an argument against what I'm saying. Clearly, we have seen that what has really been guiding the diplomacy so far is the realities on the ground, which have been determined not by diplomacy, but by military action. However, it is also important to understand that all wars end in some form of diplomacy and some form of negotiation. The Iranians have scored several victories in this, and in their view, they have amassed a large number of chips as a result of this war. But those chips are absolutely useless unless Iran translates them into a new uncontested order in the region in which Iran gets some of the benefits it's looking for, such as sanctions relief. And that can only happen through a negotiation with the United States. So I think we have to understand that military action and diplomacy in many ways are intertwined.
Mr. Parsi, before the February 28th, before this war was started, the nuclear program in Iran was the biggest problem that was creating issues. Then the Strait of Hormuz became the biggest issue, which still persists. Nuclear program still remains an issue. And now we're seeing that the fighting in Lebanon or reigning in Israel is seeming to be as big a challenge, given the number of times Donald Trump has used the language using words like prohibited, and yet Israel and Hezbollah continue the fight in Lebanon. Which is the biggest issue at this point, or the biggest impediment to any kind of a deal between US and Iran, in your appreciation?
It's already very complicated, and there's several different areas in which the two sides have significant differences. Strait of Hormuz is obviously one of them, elements of the nuclear program, particularly the stockpile. But Lebanon is a particularly critical issue for the simple reason that when it comes to the Strait of Hormuz, it's a matter between the US and Iran. When it comes to the nuclear program and the stockpile, it's a matter between the US and Iran. When it comes to Lebanon and Israel, then it's what the Israelis do and what Hezbollah does. The Iranians may have a degree of control over the Hezbollah. The question is, does the United States, is it willing to exert the same level of control over the Israelis? We have other actors in the game here that can ruin, that can sabotage things in a manner that is not the case when it comes to some of the nuclear variables, because it is under the control of these principal actors in this negotiation.
Absolutely complicated, and only seems to be getting more murky as the weeks continue and as the fighting continues between US and Iran. Well, both sides are desperate to get to a deal. That's the sense you get from both sides. But that little spurts of violence continue to emerge in the Strait of Hormuz. We've seen that since the 25th of May. It's been happening repeatedly, drones being taken down. Boats trying to place mines have also been attacked. The US CENTCOM has been putting out statements, IRGC putting out their own statements, Kuwait taking a fair amount of attacks in both these cases. We'll need to wait and watch how this one pans out, but it seems that as of now, the fighting needs to stop in Lebanon for anything else, which was already a sticking point, to get resolved. Mr. Parsi, always a pleasure speaking with you. Would look forward to discussing more with you in future.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.